After the passing of Mrs. Davis, her demise went unnoticed for a period due to the prevalent fear she evoked in everyone. Amidst this atmosphere, Stephen, her neighbor, took the initiative to enter her house and came across her lifeless form. Upon surveying her residence, he began to glean various insights about her. However, it wasn't until he stumbled upon her diary that the startling revelations about her life truly came to light. Mrs. Davis hasn't been seen in a while. Have you noticed anything from her house? Stephen asked another neighbor, Mrs. Harris, who lived right in front of his house. Living adjacent to Stephen, Mrs. Davis consistently rebuffed his friendly gestures, opting for solitude and donning all-black attire that cast an unsettling air over Pasadena's tranquil neighborhood. Speculation swirled about her house, unseen by any. Kids' whispers labeled her a witch, but Stephen disagreed, understanding her introverted nature. Despite his efforts, no one engaged with the lonely woman. While she shopped weekly and fetched her paper, her absence troubled Stephen. Not spotting her for a while ignited his concern. "No, I haven't, but she should be all right. She never leaves the house much, right?" Mrs. Callahan answered, shrugging her shoulders as if their neighbor didn't matter. "She leaves once a week and picks up the paper every day. I'm getting a little worried. I just want to know if you had seen her before I go bother her," Stephen explained. "Well, she's not going to invite you in for coffee, but it couldn't hurt to check on her. Good luck," Mrs. Harris said, and they parted ways. It was time for Stephen to approach the house and check things out himself. He knocked several times, and there was no answer. He started looking through the windows, but it was dark inside, and he couldn't see anything beyond the curtains. Fearing the worst, he wiggled all the doors until the back door through the kitchen opened, and he entered. There was a horrible smell coming from somewhere. The air felt heavy, and something crawled down his back. It felt like he shouldn't be there, and for 1 second, he wondered about the rumors that Mrs. Davis might be into witchcraft, but he dismissed that immediately and went through the house. When he finally approached her bedroom, the smell got stronger. Something in his gut told him what he would find inside, but he had to check. He was right and called the police right away. Sadly, Mrs. Davis had died alone in her bed, and the coroner said she was probably like that for several days. Stephen wanted to return to his house when they took the body away, but he couldn't. Had no one called her at all over the last few days? Why was she all alone? He focused on the pictures on her wall. She appeared happy in them, although he had never seen the woman smile. A man and 2 girls were in some of her photos. They must be her family. But why hadn't they contacted her all this time? Why was she alone? He went back into her bedroom and looked around. There was something under her pillow, and he grabbed it delicately. It was a diary. Luckily, it was not damaged like the rest of her bed. He snuck it out of her home. What's going to happen to her? He asked the police, hiding the diary as best he could. The officer didn't notice. Well, they're taking her to the morgue. If no one in her family appears, the state has ways of disposing of the body. Do you know anything about her family? The officer asked him, and Stephen shook his head, telling them the little he knew about them. When they left, he went home and opened the diary straight away. What he discovered inside was almost even more shocking. It was filled with many thoughts, worries, and tales of Mrs. Davis's life. But the most surprising aspect was that he finally realized why the woman was always alone and looked so angry all the time. According to the diary, her husband, a man she loved dearly, died when their twin girls were still children, and the girls disappeared when they were teenagers. Since then, Mrs. Davis dedicated her life to finding them. She had sold everything to fund the search until she didn't have much left. At some point, she lost hope and lived an angry existence since then, waiting to die. Stephen cried his eyes out, feeling horrible for not trying harder to get to know the woman. It wasn't his fault, but he still felt guilty for not doing something for her every once in a while. But that would change immediately. He would not let the state dispose of the body without a proper send-off. He told their neighbors the truth about Mrs. Davis, and they were all as shocked as he was. He asked them to attend the funeral he was planning, and they all showed up, bringing food and helping out. Stephen gave a speech where he vowed to continue Mrs. Davis's search for her daughters. For weeks after, Stephen and some of the neighbors did everything they could to find Mrs. Davis's daughters, and they finally discovered them on Facebook. Stephen made contact with them, they met for coffee, and the ladies revealed what happened. "We got into a bad crowd when we were young. It was bad. We told our mother to never contact us again and just disappeared from her life. Eventually, we both ended up in prison for trying to steal from a bank. We got out a few years later, but I could never face my mother again," one of the girls revealed, and Stephen felt sick. "Your mother's search for you never wavered. You both could have acted differently," he chided, revealing her resting place. His words urged them to honor her memory. Yielding, they journeyed to the graveyard, grieving her passing. As rightful heirs, Mrs. Davis's house was theirs, yet they bestowed it upon Stephen in gratitude for his compassion. The house held no allure, not even the photographs, as the pain was profound. Stephen embraced them all. Later, his abode expanded, spanning the neighboring yard, yet a portrait of the Davis remained. "Someone must remember their joy," he remarked, placing the picture in his hallway.